Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, former federal cabinet minister and award-winning financial blogger Garth Turner on the surprising connection between home ownership and joblessness. Survive and Prosper newsletter editor Harry Dent talks about his best-selling book, The Great Depression Ahead, and how demographics support that point of view. We'll talk to Garth Turner right after this.
Blue Christmas, the king of tributes, Randy Elvis Frisky, and his spectacular show band, Christmas classics, rock and holiday favorites, and the gospel music of Elvis Presley. Saturday, December 7th, Abbotsford Pentecostal Assembly. Tickets at ontourtickets.com. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Sitting in for Phil Mackesy, here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Garth Turner, former federal cabinet minister, award-winning financial blogger, administrator, and according to the Canadian Real Estate Association's chief economist, troublemaker. Garth, I think you're pretty proud of that last title.
Well, it's certainly been applied to me a few times in my career for various things, so I do try to say what I think within reason, and certainly the Real Estate Association has certainly suspect numbers that they've been giving to Canadians for a while, and I've called them out a few times on them, and I know they don't like it.
Suspect numbers like what?
Well, it goes back to, number one, real estate is the biggest investment asset in Canada. 70% of Canadians have real estate, and the bulk of Canadian net worth is in this one single asset. Well, it is also a very thinly regulated industry in many ways, certainly compared to, if everyone had, BlackBerry stock, you can guarantee that things would be different, but everybody has a house. Well, how do we know how the real estate market's doing? Well, the realtors tell us how it's doing. There's no sort of independent sales data that is collected in Canada. It's all collected by the Real Estate Association. So, boy, we better hope they're doing a great job at it because, government policy is based on that. Consumers form opinions of the market, and then those opinions move the market. So if the data is flawed, we got a problem. We got a huge problem. In fact, the bulk of Canadian net worth is affected. So I watch this stuff pretty carefully. And I certainly come across anomalies and problems that occur and are evident with the Canadian real estate's methodology of collecting numbers. I know this is a long answer, but I'm almost done. So CREA gets all of their data from local real estate boards. Local real estate boards, of course, get it from sales and listings, which are reported by individual agents. There really is no system in place to really police that. So, for example, a lot of agents will double or triple list properties. They'll list it on the Vancouver board and then the Fraser Valley board and maybe the Victoria board. So they'll triple or double list properties just to get a wider exposure. And when those properties sell, quite often they're recorded not as one sale, but as three. And of course, the listings are recorded as three, not one. So the numbers definitely are suspect. Other real estate boards revise their numbers every month for the year previous. So for example, they may tell you in October, sales were up 14% from October 2012. Meanwhile, they've gone back to 2012 and revised the numbers that they published then to eliminate all the deals that didn't close and all the other riffraff in there, almost always revised them lower. So this year's numbers look higher. Those are just two examples of what happens on a routine basis. So I point this out. The Real Estate Association doesn't like it. Garth Turner becomes a troublemaker. There you go.
Okay. Well, you're saying, though, it is very dangerous to have 70% of the population relying on their real estate to be their major asset. What's the big danger?
Well, the danger is that we all own the same thing. And so when market conditions change, interest rates inevitably go up, or prices swell too high and first-time buyers can't get in, or the Minister of Finance changes the rules, or CMHC insurance hits a new ceiling, anything that can happen will have a massive economic impact. Right now, the real estate sector, we call it the FIRE sector, financial, insurance, and real estate. That sector of the economy is at all-time highs. So in other words, up to 20% of the whole economy of Canada is now dependent upon people, buying and selling houses to each other, building condos and flogging them. It's not like we're manufacturing things or selling to the world. We're basically got this little internal engine going on where we're all just providing ourselves with new dwellings. This is what happened in, for example, California. They had about pretty close to the same amount of the local economy. The state economy was dependent on real estate. And when conditions changed in 2006, plop, they went into emergency. And of course, California is an interesting case because it's about the same size as Canada population-wise. So it is a dangerous situation when we have too much concentration of wealth in only one asset, which can turn illiquid easily. In other words, people can't sell it quickly when the market goes south. It's not like pushing a button and selling a stock or a mutual fund or an ETF. It also restricts people's mobility. They buy houses, they lose a job, they're reluctant to move to Saskatchewan to get a new job because they got a house. This is not exactly the way to build a diversified, solid economy.
You said something about being a homeowner makes you into an old fart.
Yes, there I go being delicate again. Well, actually it does. Home ownership has been proven in countries that have high levels of home ownership. They also develop high levels of unemployment. That seems weird, but it happens. And there's a new study out of the U.S. and the U.K. that actually proves that. Why? Well, people lose mobility, especially young people. I can never understand why you get young couples now. They get married and the first thing they're lusting after is a mortgage and strata fees. They want to buy a condo. I don't know why. So they buy a condo. They use up all their liquid assets. They end up with a big debt. They have higher overhead and they have no mobility. Someone loses a job or they need to chase another job or go to Toronto, they don't. So these are issues, and that does help fuel unemployment in the long haul.
And it hurts the economy because there are places where they're begging for workers, but nobody wants to, I guess, pack up and go there.
That's right. Exactly. And, we had an extreme example of this in the United States, 2005, 2006. 2007, the real estate market went into the toilet. A lot of people, their houses became worth less than their mortgages. They couldn't move because to move, they have to sell, but they couldn't sell because they owe more money than their houses are worth. They'd have to come up with a big payment just to get out. So they didn't move, and that was part of the reason the U.S. had such a deep and long-lasting recession with structural unemployment that continues to plague it to this day. So real estate actually ends up being an anchor on people's lives. Many people think, I want a home, it'll give me permanence and a nest and a sense of community. Well, that's true. But it is also this anchor that really inhibits the flexibility in your life. And at the end of the day, strictly from an economic point of view, that sucks.
I read it was recently, probably a few years ago, Canadians were the most mobile society on earth. We were moving like crazy, either, to upgrade our home or to follow a job. And now that trend has changed?
Seems to be changing. And I think part of it's because real estate prices have gone so damn high that very few people would actually pay to buy their own house. In other words, they wouldn't actually cough up the money that they think their house is worth if they had to buy it today from somebody else. So they get afraid of, if I sold my home, I just have to go and buy another one, and I'm not sure I could afford it, even though I'd sell for a good price here. So we tend to get less mobility in rising real estate markets. It's a strange thing. And when markets fall, there's actually more listings and more mobility. So we're in kind of a tough situation right now. I think the Bank of Canada is pretty worried about it. They don't like the fact we have this giant credit bubble in Canada or these things I've just been speaking about. But they can't raise mortgage rates. They can't influence mortgage rates by raising the bank rate because the economy is really weak right now. So we're kind of in a vicious catch-22. I think it's a great time for people to stay liquid and mobile because I'm just not sure what comes next.
A friend who moved from Toronto sold his house there and uses that money to rent in Vancouver. Was that a wise decision?
Oh, absolutely. Vancouver is the last place on the continent that I would go and buy a home right now, especially a single-family detached home. There's just little value there, and certainly given the two common measures, which is how much does a place cost relative to the average income, or what does a place cost relative to what I could rent it for. By both of those ratios, Vancouver is grossly overvalued, even by global standards. So renters in Vancouver are actually subsidized by landlords, and they're the smart ones.
More with Garth Turner next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back to This Week in Money. We're chatting with Garth Turner. Garth, I know we talked about this before, years ago, 2008. I did an interview with you, and you predicted that we would have a horrible recession. In fact, you said without Vancouver's high-tech industry, the Fraser Valley's growth, which is mostly real estate, and then the Alberta oil patch, the country would have been in recession 8 months before it was officially declared. Are you worried again that we're in that kind of a situation?
I think we may be close to it. The economy is way weaker than pretty much any economist expected at this point in what's supposed to be a recovery. The Bank of Canada, I think this is a key thing. The Bank of Canada actually in its most recent pronouncement basically threw in the towel. For the last couple of years, the bank has said consistently, well, we're going to keep interest rates low right now, monitor the situation. When we see signs of the economy improving, the next move in interest rates will be up. So you better all get prepared and not borrow too much. That's essentially the message. Well, the latest pronouncement was, the economy is not so hot. The output gap is too big. The economy is functioning very weakly. We're going to leave interest rates where they are for quite a protracted period of time. The key thing there, they dropped the threat of higher interest rates in the next move. That was really significant. So that's why I say the Bank of Canada basically is throwing in the towel. And I think what you should read into that is we are closer to deflation than inflation. The bank would really like to see prices escalating about 2% a year. That would indicate the economy is growing and throwing off a little bit of inflationary pressure, but we're not seeing it right now. And I think the bank's quite worried about that. This could easily slip over the edge into a recessionary situation. And what we've just been talking about with so many people have so much tied up in real estate, which is basically a non-productive asset. It's not like everybody had, liquid portfolios invested in operating companies through ETFs or stocks. They don't. They got money in these bricks and mortar, which is basically sitting around not creating anything. So it is a big amount of capital in the country that is basically dead money. The bank is quite worried about that, and they're worried about the attendant debt load that's been built up to finance all of this. So the big threat right now is what the bank calls a disorderly unwinding of consumer finances. How close are we to that? Way closer than anybody really wants to contemplate.
Well, if we hit another recession or a big downturn, the government's solution before was lower interest rates. Well, how can they go much lower?
You're exactly right. You are so right. And here we are, year number 5 into what should be an economic recovery, and basically what's left in the tool chest. Well, in the U.S., as you know, they've been pumping all this money into the economy, $85 billion a month through the central bank there to try and stimulate things. Well, I'm not even sure we can afford that in Canada. So interest rates really can't go much lower. If they did, it would just risk inflating all the debt that people have, because people take on more the lower rates go. So it's, as I said, catch-22. I think it is a precarious situation.
It's going to get to the point that banks will have to pay us for us to take their money.
Yes, indeed. That's almost the case in Europe right now. European Central Bank, the ECB, chopped its key rate down by half a few weeks ago, and they're lending money to the banks at 0%. So another cut, yep, they're paying people to come in and take a loan.
Well, if they're that desperate, I just heard on broadcast or on the financial network that to move real estate in Miami, a guy has a $12 million mansion. It's got its own ballroom. He's throwing in a Rolls Royce if you buy it.
Yeah, it's not a bad technique. And, you know, a lot of developers in Toronto and Vancouver have been adding cars, for example, to their offerings. When you buy a condo, you get a new car, even up to a BMW in Toronto they're offering. So, it shows you that, you know, the things are a lot less robust than we are actually being told, and that goes back to the first item we talked about, where the realtors really want people to think things are booming and they're great and go out there and spend money. But when you see a collapse in condominium sales or new housing sales, you certainly are aware of something else. Actually, new house and new condo sales in metropolitan Toronto, for example, population 6 million, they are down 40%. You can't ignore a number like that.
Wow, and that's not even if Rob Ford moved in next door.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Those aren't even crack houses. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, maybe those will be the places that are the most affordable to buy after this, with all the publicity they're getting. And just commenting on Rob Ford, Toronto is a flagship, city for this nation as much as everybody else hates it. In fact, they say, what keeps Canada together is their common hatred of Toronto.
Exactly.
But really, what Rob Ford's doing, he's the butt of every joke and every talk show. He's replaced Anthony Weiner. And so every comic is calling him a godsend. But what's this doing to our, national image otherwise?
Oh, it's not good. It's not good at all. And Rob Ford is the kind of meltdown personality that, grabs headlines around the world because everybody relates to it. It's the 7 deadly sins. He seems to be a walking dictionary of them. Every vice and every weakness that's around, he tends to, have, he fits into it perfectly. So that's why it's such a human story. It's not a political story. It's not economic. It's human. And people love it when others fail. So it generally is getting a lot more attention than it deserves. However, it is negative, without a doubt. And Toronto will, if this carries on for a while, Toronto will forever be associated with this clown. And it's just too bad because it does have economic implications.
Sure. You have a city council that's trying to limit his powers. Mm-hmm. I think the Ontario premier wandered into this mess as well, saying we're looking at perhaps creating legislation.
Yeah, well, every day it seems to get worse. A new low is hit, so there has to be some resolution. I think people just can't imagine going on with this guy at the helm of the city for another year or two.
Well, instead of selling bonds in Toronto, you just sell bobbleheads of them.
That's right. Yes, bobbleheads. Well, he's definitely a good candidate for modeling those after.
I know. I took a look at one of those bobbleheads. I don't think he's ever been that small in his life, even when he was a baby.
Probably not.
And I'm not taking a shot at his weight or anything, but it's pretty hard for him to sneak in and out of places trying to do clandestine stuff.
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
So, Garth, if you're holding on to real estate, what about people who've paid off their mortgage? Are they okay?
Well, it depends what else they've got in life. If they've got the bulk of their net worth sitting in their home, I still think real estate's going down. So if you have been taking your, view of your wealth based on valuations in the last year or two, that's going to be a different scenario in a few years from now. You won't be worth as much. So I definitely hope you've diversified your portfolio into other things. As I say, a big risk a lot of people are taking is not being diversified. Having one asset is just a bad idea. I don't care if it's a stock or a bond or, a house or whatever. You don't just have one asset. And, but people feel differently about real estate. They just don't understand other things well enough. So there is a danger there. If you paid your home off, great. Congratulations. You might want to consider taking some equity out of there and diversifying into a portfolio to at least give you a bit of cushion if and when real estate does correct.
You're not a big fan of Finance Minister Jim Flaherty. Can you tell us why?
Oh, well, I know him, and, he's growing into the job. I wasn't impressed, though, when he started off, and the first couple of years, I think he was quite responsible for this real estate bubble getting started and bringing in zero down payments that were going to be financed by the government and through CMHC's insurance and 40-year amortizations. That was just a big, huge mistake. And at the time he did that, the U.S. real estate market was melting down. There was adequate evidence of what happens when bad policy hits real estate. And I think that by trying to, ape the American deregulation of the real estate sector, that Mr. Flaherty walked right into this problem. So he is the architect of his own problems right now. And he's tried to cool the market off with a number of moves in the last few years, but I think it's pretty hypocritical of him to stand up now and tell people to, get ready for higher interest rates and cut their borrowing, when actually it was the combination of his moves and the Bank of Canada dropping interest rates to next to nothing, which turned everybody in this country into a mortgage and debt addict.
Garth, is there a website people can check out to find out what your latest views are?
Oh, sure. Yeah, happy for them to come and visit me. Greater Fool. www.greaterfool.ca is where I post 6 days a week, and a lot of it's real estate related. So come on over. We have a good little conversation going there.
Garth, thanks for chatting with us.
Pleasure indeed. As always, thank you.
After the break, Harry Dent on This Week in Money.
Blue Christmas, the king of tributes, Randy Elvis Frisky, and his spectacular show band, Christmas classics, rock and holiday favorites, and the gospel music of Elvis Presley. Saturday, December 7th, Abbotsford Pentecostal Assembly. Tickets at ontourtickets.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
My guest is Harry Dent, editor of Survive and Prosper newsletter, author of several best-selling books, The Great Depression Ahead, and coming out at the start of the new year, we'll have another book, The Demographic Cliff. That one sounds pretty scary, and I know what that's all about. Too many old folks, not enough young ones to look after them, I think. Kinda?
Yeah, well, more important, Jim, is that, we started in Japan. They went off the cliff with a generation peaking in spending and a decline. But that was back in the 90s. 2008, as expected by our forecast, the United States went off the cliff, but Europe's in deep trouble already with all types of debt problems, and they haven't even gone off the cliff yet. They're going to start going off next year. So our point in this next book is that governments keep stimulating, thinking, we can get things back to normal. The demographics only get worse and worse, especially for the next 6 years or so. So I think these stimulus programs are just going to fail at some point, and probably as early next year.
I've heard from several experts who say quantitative easing is like being addicted to heroin. You're going to have to get off it at some point. Yeah,
that's right. You create a bubble through stimulative policies and a good economy, but now we no longer have a good economy. Ever since 2007, government stimulus, quantitative easing, monetary and fiscal stimulus, huge deficits are only offsetting a declining economy and deflationary and debt deleveraging trends. So governments are just putting off something that's inevitable. A debt bubble has to burst at some point. Financial assets that are driven, stocks, commodities, everything, real estate, have to come back down to reality, or the next generation cannot afford to live anymore and prosper. And so we're just putting this off because nobody wants the thing to go down like under Herbert Hoover in the early 30s on your watch. So every president, every central banker says, hey, let's stimulate now and worry about it later, and at some point it's going to hit. And we're saying 2014 and 15 is the next time we're going to get a deeper downturn. It'll be worse than 2008 and 9.
Yes, that's, again, another thing that other people have said, because all these companies are going to be used to cheap money. When it stops happening, they're going to panic. And then, of course, once you see a drop on the market, panic sets in, even if they don't need to panic.
Yeah. Again, you blow a bubble up. It doesn't take much to burst it. In 2008, the bubble burst because we already had debt levels stretched at more than twice what we saw in 1929 in the last bubble. I mean, in governments around the world, and private debt, total debt, there's more private debt than public. And so all it took was a subprime crisis, which really was 4 states, California, Nevada, Arizona, Florida. 4 states caused a worldwide crash. Why? It was just a trigger for a debt crisis and a demographic slowdown that was already happening.
I wonder if governments deliberately allowed the crash to happen because real estate was going up 15% a year. That is unsustainable.
Well, yeah, they want to at first, and even China's trying to slow down its real estate bubble, which has gotten out of control. And if we think we had a real estate bubble, Shanghai real estate's gone up 6.5 times in the last 13 years. Ours went up 2.1 times in 6 years. And look at the bubble burst we had. They will slow it at first, but the problem is once these things start slowing and real estate start going down and all these loans fail against it, then you get this deleveraging, and then the government turns around and says, "Oh my gosh, we got to do the other way. Now we got to re-stimulate harder." I mean, it's manic depressive is what it is, and so we're in a manic phase now, and we're going to see another depressive phase in the next few years. And same thing. And in 2007, they stimulated out of the last bubble burst, the tech stocks bubbles and all that stuff, and now they're going to, they've stimulated out of this, and they've got little room to grow because with more and more QE, quantitative easing, economic growth keeps decelerating, rather accelerating. So at some point, this thing's just going to fail. And that already happened for Europe. In mid-2012, they went into a recession, actually a depression in Southern Europe, despite, higher and higher quantitative easing, because at some point, artificial stimulus doesn't work. It's not real. It's not like demographic trends where people earn and spend more, or technology trends where you invest in the future and you get higher productivity. All of that's peaked. Everybody's on the internet and broadband now. Baby boomers are over their peak in spending in more and more countries around the world, and it's going to get worse and worse. Again, Europe falls next, and after that, the rest of East Asia. There's no way governments can stimulate their way out of this, and it's already showing to be diminishing returns.
Is there any way to correct this? Or are we so deep that we just have to let things fall?
Well, you have to let things fall. Once you've created a bubble, you have to correct it. But in the countries and in the smaller countries in Europe that were not in the EU and were forced to devalue their currencies and cut back and suffer some short-term inflation from imports, they're all turning around. Iceland, Estonia, countries like that, even Ireland to some degree. But the ones that keep stimulating keep doing a little better, and then it gets worse and worse. The best thing is to restructure debt. In the United States, private debt alone, way bigger than government debt, went from $20 trillion to $42 trillion in just 8 years from 2000 to 2008. That was all the real estate bubble and banks lending 3 times as much against mortgages and income as they did before. And you need to get that debt out. This is toxic debt. It came from a bubble. It's a burden on the private sector, consumers and businesses. If we were to restructure this debt, just like businesses do in a Chapter 11 and say, you know what, we overdid it, we're in trouble, but if we can get this debt, if we can renegotiate the debt down 50 cents on the dollar, we can go forward and the creditors win outside of a fire sale, and then the business can keep going. That's the way our country is. We need a giant Chapter 11, and government should be only giving assistance to banks, minor assistance to the ones that write down debt to market value. Instead, they're giving a carte blanche, trillions of dollars to banks to keep them going, and all they're doing is putting it in reserves or speculating with it. They're not making loans. They're not turning around the economy. And most importantly, they're not writing down debts at the fair market value to business and consumers. That's the only way. When demographic trends are slowing, if you do not write down and restructure debt, you don't free up any cash flow for the economy to grow again. We did that in the 30s, 1930 to 33. It was a horrible downturn. But debt ratios dropped dramatically, and we came screaming out of that downturn. We're not coming screaming out of this.
And as an ordinary person, it's pretty hard to ignore all those ads on TV telling you, if you get our credit card, you don't have any interest on it for the first year. Go out and spend your guts out.
Yeah, again, we debt grew. Total debt, private and public, in the United States, it grew 2.5 times GDP from 1983 to 2008, and the private debt grew even faster, 2.7 times. So we've been on a debt binge forever, and now the government is saying, hey, the way to get out of this is to get people to borrow more and spend more. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in history. It's short-sighted. Again, it's just a way for any president, administration, or central banker to put off the crisis until they get out of office. I mean, note that Alan Greenspan got out just before the whole thing came down, and now Ben Bernanke's going to get out just before the next one goes down. Janet Yellen, if she gets in, the poor lady, is going to take it in the shorts, and I think Obama's still going to take it in the shorts. I think we're going to see a bigger crisis before he gets out of office, and he will look a lot like Herbert Hoover.
I wonder if he'd like to be able to be like a Canadian Prime Minister and call an election anytime he could. Even though he can't run, he can pick the time.
Yeah, even now he'd be in some trouble over Obamacare and some other policies that have not gone so good. But yeah, I mean, the problem is whoever's in office when the music stops and there's not enough chairs to sit in takes it. Now, that's not true. Alan Greenspan had as much to do with this debt bubble or more, well, way more than Bernanke, and Bernanke just extended it. All he did was extend the bubble with massive quantitative easing that just it is like heroin. It eases the pain of a slowdown. Japan's now been doing this for 17 years. They've been in a coma economy, less than zero GDP growth, slightly less than zero inflation. They're just flatlining. They're like a patient in an emergency ward on life support. They're dying, and they're just keeping the patient barely living. It'd be better to let the system detox, let this debt get flushed out like in past down cycles. And governments are just saying, no, we can't fail. Can't let the economy go down. Failure is what sets the next stage of innovation throughout history. The greatest innovations come when there's a failure in the economy. Old companies are wiped out and makes way for new companies. So the government is basically saying, to prevent a crisis, we're going to kill the golden goose of free market capitalism, which has actually created the greatest rise in standard of living. 8 times, by the way, our standard of living has grown in the last century. They're killing it.
And is there, like I said, is there any way to convince these people to do the right thing, which is probably get your fingers out of the pie?
No, there's not. They're not going to listen to me. They're going to listen to the mainstream economists. They're in the same la-la land as the politicians and everybody else. They just want to keep the bubble going. They want to prevent a downturn. I mean, I'm like, if you don't want a hangover, don't drink a bottle of bourbon. It's that simple. We've already drank the bottle of bourbon. We've already seen debt grow faster than any time in history. And this time, it wasn't just the U.S. and a few countries. It was around the world. I mean, it's in emerging countries, but it was all of Europe. It was, Japan. It's China. It's U.S. It's everybody. And so this is a global crisis, and all it takes is another part of the globe. I don't think it'll be the U.S. that triggers the next crisis. It'll be Southern Europe or the greatest real estate bubble ever, and I mean ever in history in China. People have no idea what's happening in China. They're forcing people off the farms, moving them into condos. Half of them have no jobs. They're just buying, the local governments are taking their land, selling it off to developers. That's how they finance themselves, pushing these people in condos, getting them to build more condos or take short-term jobs. But when the music stops there, you got 250 million people in China that are permanently low-skilled, unemployed, that may go back to the countryside and make an already great bubble in real estate with 25% vacancies in the cities. 25%, by the way, go even higher. When China falls, it's going to be the biggest. It's going to be like an elephant falling over when it finally falls. It may be the last because the government so controls it, but everything I look in China, they are topping the charts in pollution, vacancy rates, overbuilding, everything. They are the biggest bubble in history because the government is just driving the economy, building stuff for nobody.
Yes, saw a documentary. They've made a fake Paris, complete with an Eiffel Tower.
Yeah.
It would hold 500,000 people.
Empty.
There's 250 permanent residents.
Yeah. Ordos, built for 1 million, 70,000 residents, and most of those have come slowly just in recent years. It was totally vacant. The biggest mall in all of the world, twice the size of the Mall of Minnesota, the biggest one in the United States, totally empty. Now they're turning it into a tourist destination because it was built like Disneyland. They're saying, oh, come and see this great, experimentation. When you let a government take over and totally drive the economy, they will overbuild everything. They will become corrupt. Basically in China, you got the Communist Party that pushes down power to all the local communist parties, and they get all the gravy, and they get all the bridges to nowhere and all the infrastructure building and get to borrow it at advantageous rates, and this thing is out of control. I'm telling you, when China burst, I studied bubbles for hundreds of years. This is the greatest bubble I have ever seen any time. And then when it goes down, it's going to be hard.
More with Harry Dent next on This Week in Money.
Blue Christmas, the king of tributes, Randy Elvis Frisky, and his spectacular show band, Christmas classics, rock and holiday favorites, and the gospel music of Elvis Presley. Saturday, December 7th, Abbotsford Pentecostal Assembly. Tickets at ontourtickets.com.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Harry Dent, editor of Survive and Prosper newsletter. Harry, we can talk a bit more about China. It's interesting that they've had this huge drive to become very successful financially, and yet that drive is going to be their demise.
Yeah, I tell you, number one indicator, China's been growing at, 10, 12% at best, and now 7 to 8% recently. The fastest growing country in the world, and the second largest economy in the world, and the largest population in the world up until India takes them over. But you look at their stock market, it declined 70% in 2008, bounced a little bit into February 2010. It's been going down ever since. It's back near the lows. They are building stuff. The Chinese government is driving, exports driving, infrastructure, pushing people off of farms in the cities with no skills and nothing to do. They're building stuff for nobody. And when you build stuff for nobody in industry and in residential and stuff, you have excess capacity, which means no profits. Their stock market's showing they're a fast growth country with no profits. That's not sustainable. So China's the greatest bubble in the world. If real estate is 15 times earnings in London, the highest in the developed world, it was 10 to 11 in San Francisco, LA at the top of our bubble before it burst. It's 28 to 35 times in the largest cities in China, and it's mostly foreign buyers and very rich people buying this stuff. They got the greatest real estate bubble in history. When it burst, the richest people in China and the top 10% there control more of the income and wealth than they do even in the United States. That top 10% controls 60% of the income, 88% of the financial assets. When this bubble bursts, their economy is going to implode faster than anything you've ever seen.
Well, I was wondering who's going to buy those condos because wages in China are still very, very low. The average person couldn't afford it.
I was just over there a year and a half ago. And I've been in India 3 times before that. All the workers in these cities, just good old hotel workers, taxi drivers, whatever, people who make moderate incomes, less than our middle class, but they'd be considered middle class there. They're commuting in from an hour and a half, 2 hours away. They're living in some high rise, 3 families to a small place. And these high rises, I noticed, look good when you're going by because they're new. You look inside the windows, they are horrible. There's almost no interior. It's just like a carved out, cement box, and you got 3 families living in a small place. These people, can't live anywhere near the inner city because only foreign buyers and people doing business there and the top 10% can afford to live in these areas. So yeah, who's going to buy this real estate that these people have bid up? And when the global economy goes down, like in 2008, these foreign buyers disappear overnight.
Well, just taking a look at some basic stuff, we're talking about you should let markets run their own natural cycle. Do all markets cycle? Yeah,
I mean that's what I'm saying. You look at history, people understand the reason free market capitalism works so well. It's a play of opposites. Boom and bust, inflation and deflation, innovation and creative destruction, male and female. I mean, you just go on and on. That's just what it takes. We get the greatest innovations, not in upturns, in downturns. The breakthrough innovations come when the economy's challenged. People have to try harder, survival of the fittest, and then they get adopted by the same generations which were young in the downturns when they grow and buy stuff in the upturns. But the upturns only make companies more complacent, less efficient. It's like General Motors in the 50s and 60s. They thought they were the king of the world, and they became the worst corporation in history in the 70s and 80s. So we require these cycles, and governments want to iron out and make it like, we just grow at 3% like a machine and 1 to 2% inflation. That's what the Fed does. The Fed's like, we want to target, 3 to 4% growth, 4 to 6% unemployment, and 1 to 2% inflation. This is turning an organic, dynamic process that innovates like crazy into a boring, rote machine. They're killing the golden goose.
I was going to say it's like the 1950s under Eisenhower. You're bored to death.
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
bland.
you get in this nice little sweet spot, and everybody's happy for a while, but then next thing you know, you're in a deep recession in the late 60s and 70s and early 80s, and same thing, roaring 20s, everything was great. Great Depression in the 30s. So, but these cycles are necessary. So the only way to iron them out is don't go to such extremes in the first place. Don't let a debt bubble get out of control. Don't let banks lend unlimited amount of money. Don't create Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to make mortgages even cheaper and have a government backing. That's going to encourage more people who can't afford a home to buy a home. And then when the slowdown comes, guess what? Their credit gets destroyed and they have to move back to their trailer. This was not good policy. It never is if you look at history. Bubbles will occur at certain times regardless when things are really good and interest rates are falling. But don't make them bigger than they have to be. And when they burst, let them burst. And if anything, the governments can actively help restructure that debt and make it more civilized rather than in the 1930s just letting the whole banking system collapse and cause, worse of a downturn than you needed to. But you can't avoid the downturn. Again, if you can drink a bottle of bourbon, you're going to have a hangover the next morning. So, don't stop the hangover. Just take it and get over it. Maybe take an aspirin or something. But it's just, politicians and economists don't understand the very dynamics that have caused our prosperity, and that's why they're willing to kill it for some short-term gain. I mean, it's pathetic to me that economists don't know better. I'm not even an economist. I came out of business and generated my own economic theories, demographics, technology cycles, commodity cycles, things that are totally obvious if you look at the past. These people have no clue at all. They just look at the short-term symptomatic indicator and say, oh, the economy's going down, we should pump it up. Inflation's going up, we should knock it down. We have some deflation, we should stop it. No, the economy needs these cycles. Inflation and deflation create the greatest innovations.
Are governments in such bad shape that we could be looking at more bail-ins for the banks?
I mean, Greece has had 3 bailouts now in different ways. And then the last one was supposed to last to 2020. Now their banks, their bad loans have gone from like 18 to 25 to 30% in the last 2 years. It's only going up. Spain real estate is still falling, the greatest bubble in Europe. Unemployment's at 26, 27%. Bad loans are going straight up. And people over there in Europe saying, oh, we've turned the corner. Well, yeah, Germany and England did a little bit in some major countries, but the worst countries are going down, and those are the ones that are going to sink to Europe. It's in southern Europe. So things are not getting better in the worst countries there, and those countries, Greece and Spain, and to a lesser degree Portugal, are in depressions, not recessions, and Italy and France are heading in that direction, and Germany actually has the worst demographics ahead in all of Europe. They're going to fall off the cliff from 2014 for decades. How is Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, the strongest countries there, going to hold up the Eurozone when they have the worst demographic trends? And they do.
And maybe explain to people what those trends are.
Well, demographics is simple. It's the one predictive thing. In developed countries like the U.S. or Europe or whatever, we enter the workforce around 20 between high school and college. We get married, earn and spend more money as we raise our families, buy houses, borrow money, all the things that drive our economy. We become more productive too. Young workers are unproductive. As we get in our middle age, we're the most productive. All these things drive booms as new generations go into their peak spending years, which is in the mid to late 40s, age 46 in the United States, 47 in Japan, and very similar in other countries. But once a generation like the baby boom has peaked in their spending cycle, which we predicted 20 years ago would come around 2007, well, they're going to spend less as their kids leave the nest. They're going to save more for retirement, and spending less causes the economy to slow down, which causes earnings to slow down for companies. If it hadn't been for this massive, I mean unprecedented stimulus, we would have been in the depression already. Because of the high debt levels that would have deleveraged, and when debt gets destroyed, it kills banks and businesses, but it also frees up, as I said earlier, cash flow for businesses and consumers who get their debts written down. Getting debts written down is a get out of jail free card. So, this is what happened. The baby boom was the biggest generation we've seen in 250 years around the world. Greatest boom from 83 to 2007. That was just a 46-year lag on the rising birth index in the United States for the baby boomers. And now it's going down, and governments think, oh, if we can just keep stimulating a little longer, we'll get back to 4% growth and 1 to 2% inflation and 2 to 3% productivity. It's not going to happen. The demographics only get worse. You know, young to middle-aged people are productive, older people are less productive, young people are inflationary, older people are deflationary. We can prove all this. We do this in all our books. And economists are oblivious. They're just like, no, we care about monetary and fiscal policy, and that's what drives the economy. I'm like, you poor idiots. You have no idea.
Harry, is there a website or that a person could go to find out more about your philosophies on the economy?
Yeah. The best thing is go to harrydent.com. That's where you can sign up. We have a free daily newsletter. I mean, 6 days a week, page and a half a day. It keeps people up on our views on current affairs. It keeps people up on our research. We have broader newsletters for people who want, you know, more sophisticated analysis and recommendations. But this is a really good newsletter. It's a way to get to know us, what we think. I can only say so much here in 20 minutes or so, but you just go to harrydent.com. All you do is put in your email, and boom, you're on. That's it. And you'll hear from us as much as you want to until you decide you like us or don't like us.
Harry, fascinating stuff. I'm sorry we had such a limited time to chat.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks to our guests, Garth Turner and Harry Dent. And thank you for listening. I'm Jim Goddard for Phil Mackesy. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.